on Hoarders, we visit a house with craft scraps stashed in every corner, mountains of craft paper packaging from shipments, and a seemingly endless supply of glass jars. Seriously, who needs all those glass jars? It's me, and this is my house. Hi there, friends. I'm Amber, and welcome back to Sustainable Jungle, where we share sustainability tips, tricks, hacks, products, brands, and stories to better our planet. And today, I'm tackling a topic that might hit home, literally, for a lot of you out there. Reusing versus hoarding, and specifically, where to draw the line between the two. Now, we all want to be good stewards of the planet, but sometimes our desire to keep everything just in case can lead to clutter and stress. One jar can turn into a collection of 50, as I know very well, and before we know it, we are overwhelmed by the clutter. And if that feels like you, know that you are not alone. It's estimated that 2 to 6% of people worldwide may struggle with a hoarding disorder. In the US, around 19 million people are affected. And no, hoarding doesn't have to be taken to extremes, a la the popular TV show Hoarders. For many of us, hoarding doesn't look like piles and piles of junk lining every room in the house. It just looks like a single kitchen cabinet being packed to the brim, or wearing the same things on repeat because the thought of digging through your closet gives you so much anxiety. Guilty. And hoarding is often linked to an emotional attachment to things. Maybe it's a fear of waste or the anxiety of just not having enough. And this fear can cause us to hold on to everything, thinking that it might be useful one day. And the result? Piles of stuff that we don't really need. And ironically, it then becomes harder to reuse what we do because it's buried underneath all of that clutter. Look familiar? Don't worry. We've all been there. Or at least I have. Many, many times. So, how do we avoid that scene? How can we strike a balance between sustainable living and keeping our homes a little bit more clutter-free? Well, let's dive in and chat about it. But first, remember to take a quick moment to like this video and hit that subscribe button if you're not already, so you can stay in the loop on all kinds of low-impact living content. Now, let's chat clutter. You may have seen some of our other videos on what to do with things like old clothes, old books, and old Tupperware. And if not, I will link to them in the description below so you can check them out just in case they happen to be useful to you. But in these videos, you'll notice that many of the ways that we recommend disposing of old things that no longer serve their original purpose is by, well, finding a new purpose for them. Sustainability in general often encourages us to save things that we might otherwise throw away, like this glass jar or this plastic container. Why? Because these items can be reused, of course. This glass jar was originally a jar of pasta sauce that I purchased, but now, after saving up so many of these, I don't need to purchase pasta sauce anymore because I actually can my own sauce using tomatoes that I grow in my garden, and then reuse all of the jars that I saved up over that time. And glass jars are just the obvious example here, but there are obviously endless ways that you can take one thing and use it as something else. For instance, old t-shirts can become cleaning rags, old tires can become planters outside, you can turn old socks into draft stoppers for your doors. That one can actually even be a 2-for-1 solution. If you have a bunch of old pillows that you want, take out the stuffing from them and then stuff them in your old socks. Or you could take an old toxic yoga mat that you don't actually want to do yoga on and turn it into a non-slip base for things like furniture. Or even just taking plastic food storage containers that you don't actually want to store food in anymore and using them to store non-edible items. Like, I use these old Taleni ice cream containers to store everything craft related. Like, seriously, you will find these stashed everywhere holding something throughout my house. Here's the problem. We just don't always have an immediate use for things that we want to get rid of. So do we save them for just in case and let them clutter our homes for a day that may or may not come? Or do we kind of just chalk this one up as a loss and dispose of it in some other way, even if that means throwing it away? And if we can recycle it traditionally, should we? Not to sound obvious, but this is the focus of the sustainability movement because it can really reduce our impact on 2 fronts. So number 1, reusing things means that we are reducing the amount of waste that we're contributing to the solid waste stream. And yes, while some of these products that we suggest you reuse can be recycled, not all of them can. And sometimes the recycling impact is actually much greater than if you just recycle it in some way yourself. So again, to go back to the obvious example, let's look at glass. Aside from the fact that my town doesn't even have glass recycling, as many small rural towns don't, recycling glass actually has a huge impact on the environment. You see, there's a really high amount of energy that's needed to melt the glass down, even in the recycling process. And one study suggests that recycled glass requires only 13% less energy compared to virgin glass. And the 16% of the emissions that it does save by recycling it are really just counteracted by the additional recycling loop transportation requirements. glass. So think about it for a second. Glass is heavy, right? At least compared to plastic. It's a bulky material. So transporting it from recycling collection points to recycling centers produces a lot of emissions. But at the same time, every cullet, which is the technical term for recycled glass, by the way, saves roughly 1.2 tons of raw materials from being sourced, and there's a massive source of emissions and environmental destruction alone. By reusing a glass bottle only once, the impact can be reduced by 40%, though it is worth noting that that percentage significantly decreases on second use based on life cycle analyses of these. What's a sustainable living advocate to do with all those reusable glass jars that are suddenly staring you in the face in your too full cabinet? Sure, they're useful to store and organize stuff, but most of us only have so much that we can possibly store. For me, I have to face the fact that if I decide not to save a glass jar, I pretty much have to throw it away, because to recycle it would require a minimum 4-hour drive to the closest major city, which sort of defeats the point, I think. Now, I never really thought about this conundrum until the last year or so of my life, and here's a little background to understand why. Some of you may know that I live in a 400 square foot tiny house on wheels, and when I moved here, I had been actually doing the van life thing for a couple of years prior, so I owned basically nothing. But since then, I have accumulated all this stuff, as you do. It just happens. Now I'm starting to look at my already limited and far too full living space full of things that I've saved over the years and questioning some of my life choices. Again, as you do. How can we keep in the good habit of reusing things without the overwhelm that's often associated with it? The key is mindful reusing. And here's a few practical tips to help you, and myself for that matter, because I'm working on implementing these right now too. So let's dive in. So number one is to set clear boundaries. Before you decide to keep something, ask yourself, do I have a specific plan for this item? What can I use this for now? Or maybe, do I have a use for this in the next month? For instance, I may not immediately have a use for an old jar, but if I know that my tomatoes are going to be ripening soon, that I'm going to have to start canning, I'm going to hang on to it because I'm going to need it when that time rolls around. But if the answer is no to the immediate future, maybe it's time to let it go. Limiting yourself to a set number of reusable items can also help. Say, keeping only 5 glass jars instead of 20. And that obviously depends on your lifestyle and needs. Because I do so much canning, 20 is on the low end for me, but you do you. And if you have something squirreled away that you haven't used in the last 6 months, consider getting rid of it. Number 2, create designated reuse zones. This basically means to designate a specific spot in your house for reusable items, especially things that you don't maybe have a use for right now, which A, is really helpful because then if you decide that you do have a use for it, you don't have to search everywhere for where did I put that? I know I saved it. Again, really guilty of that. So whether it's a drawer, a shelf, or a bin, keeping everything in one place also helps you see how much you've accumulated and prevents things from just taking over your home. For me, this is largely my crafting storage area. I'm an upcycle crafter, so I find lots of random uses for things I've saved, from different fabric scraps to just different little embellishments, all kinds of stuff. I find use for them at random points in time. So that's kind of the area in my house where I allow myself to freely store a huge collection of reusable items. And then if that space overflows, I decide that it's time to reassess what I'm holding on to and what things that I'm probably not going to use. Number 3, have regular decluttering sessions. Instead of doing it once a year or once every 5 years, as a lot of us are guilty of doing, take some time more frequently to assess what you've saved. Maybe every 6 months or every year if you're like me and all of a sudden the year's gone. You're like, what happened? So when you do these, ask yourself, is there any items that I haven't touched in a year? And if there is, that's a good sign that they're not really serving you and it's okay to let them go. Donate, recycle, or repurpose them in a new way, perhaps. Number 4, get a little bit more creative with your repurposing on that last note. If you're holding on to something because you're not sure how to reuse it, but it seems like it should be useful, well, branch out. Old glass jars can become planters, or fabric scraps can be used for DIY upcycle projects. For instance, I have this old candle jar that, I'm not really going to use it to store food things in, but I use it to store all of my paintbrushes and other art supplies. And if you don't have an immediate plan for it, it's okay to pass it on. But if you're drawing a complete blank on what to use things, I personally love Pinterest. And you can just follow what type of item that you want to upcycle, followed by upcycle ideas, and boom. I get so many things I never thought of. For instance, last year I had an old pallet from a mattress that was delivered to me, and I know that there's a ton of things that you can reuse old pallets for, but I didn't really have anything specific in mind, so I went to Pinterest and found all these ideas and turned it into a planter outside. So in the end, it's all about balance. Reusing items can absolutely help us live more sustainably and prevent the need to buy new things, but too much reusing can overwhelm us and our space, which can actually have the unintended opposite effect of burning us out on our sustainable living efforts. And we definitely don't want that. But by setting regular boundaries, having regular decluttering sessions, and only keeping what truly serves a purpose, we can embrace both sustainability and minimalism at the same time. So, what about you? How do you balance reusing and keeping things clutter-free? What sort of things do you save and which do you let go? Are there any rules of thumb that you follow? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your tips, both for the rest of our readers and for me myself personally. And thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more sustainable living tips from us. This is Amber from SJ, signing off until next time.